Life flows like an endless stream, occasionally surprising us in ways we never imagined. Many of us believe that as we grow older, life settles into a predictable rhythm, free from the turbulence and uncertainties of youth. Yet, life often defies such expectations. Moments arise that unsettle us, challenging the beliefs we once held dear. My name is Eileen, and I'm 63 years old. After decades as a school principal and raising two wonderful children, I thought I knew myself well. My husband passed away 5 years ago, and since then, I've embraced a calm, structured life filled with morning walks, gardening, and family time. I believe the spontaneity and excitement of youth were behind me. But recently, something shifted. Subtly at first, yet profoundly. It began so quietly that I almost didn't notice. A lingering glance, a moment of connection that seemed innocent until it wasn't. Caleb, my son Adam's close friend, has been like a part of our family for years. I trusted him implicitly, seeing him as a second son. Then one day, everything felt different. There was a quiet tension between Caleb and me, an unspoken understanding neither of us dared to address. Reflecting on that moment, I'm astonished by how quickly a seemingly secure and stable life can feel so delicate and uncertain. That day lingers in my mind, leaving me to question its meaning and why it stays with me. This is my story. It may not be extraordinary, but it carries a quiet beauty that I hold close. After over 30 years as a school administrator, I retired to savor the peaceful moments I'd long yearned for. My husband Neil passed away 5 years ago, a strong and compassionate man with whom I shared a deep, enduring love despite our differences. Losing him was a devastating blow, but I found solace in my daily routines and the strong bond I share with my children, especially Adam. Adam and I have grown much closer since Neil passed away. At 35, Adam is a dependable and caring son, someone Neil and I have always been proud of. Although he lives alone, Adam frequently visits, ensuring the house and family are well taken care of. His warmth and humor fill my otherwise quiet home, and his stories and jokes always bring a smile to my face. Often, Adam's visits include Caleb, one of his closest friends. They met in college, and Caleb has been a regular presence in our lives ever since. Now 37, Caleb has built a successful career as an engineer. His steady nature and dedication remind me so much of Neil. Thoughtful and respectful, Caleb has a quiet charm that makes people feel at ease. Over the years, I've been grateful for the close bond Adam and Caleb share. Caleb's presence brings a sense of calm to the house, something I've always appreciated deeply. One afternoon, after finishing some gardening, I decided to relax with a cup of tea. Adam was out of town on business, and the house was unusually still. Just as I was settling into my chair, there was a knock at the door. To my surprise, it was Caleb. "Hello, Mrs. Caldwell," he greeted me with his familiar, cheerful smile. Adam mentioned he was out of town, but I wanted to return some books I borrowed. "Caleb, it's so nice to see you," I said, genuinely pleased by his unexpected visit. "Come in. If you have time, stay for tea." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'd love that. It's been a while since we've had a proper chat." We settled in the living room, and at first, the conversation was light: work, family, and general updates. But the quiet house and the unhurried pace of the afternoon seemed to create a more relaxed atmosphere. I felt unusually comfortable talking with Caleb, as though the usual boundaries had softened. As I handed him his cup of tea, our fingers brushed lightly. At first, I thought nothing of it, but as the conversation continued, I noticed Caleb's gaze lingering on me. It was subtle but undeniable, and it gave me a fleeting sense of self-consciousness. "Thank you," he said softly, his smile a bit uncertain. He pulled his hand back quickly, and for a moment an awkward silence hung in the air. It was such a small gesture, a brief touch, a fleeting glance, but it shifted something between us. I felt a warmth, a subtle awareness that I couldn't quite place. I brushed it off as my imagination, blaming the quietness of the afternoon, or perhaps my own vulnerability. But as we continued talking, I became more aware of him, the way he leaned in when I spoke, his soft laugh, and the kindness in his eyes. There was an unspoken tension, a line neither of us acknowledged but both seemed to sense. By the time Caleb left, I felt unsettled, more aware of him than I'd ever been before. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was nothing. Yet the memory lingered, leaving behind an unfamiliar mix of anticipation and confusion. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of that afternoon with Caleb. No matter how much I tried to dismiss it as an ordinary interaction, the lingering sense of his touch, his gaze, and the quiet intensity in his eyes stayed with me. I felt foolish for allowing my thoughts to dwell on it, for letting my imagination wander into uncharted territory. Caleb was practically family to Adam, someone I had seen grow from a college student into a successful professional. Yet, I couldn't ignore the faint thrill his presence had sparked, the warmth and comfort that lingered long after he had gone. I wondered if he had felt it too, or if it was merely a product of my own loneliness and nostalgia. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that it was nothing more than a fleeting feeling. Still, the memory persisted, a quiet question lingering in the back of my mind. A week later, Caleb stopped by again, this time to return a book he had borrowed. He seemed relaxed, and I invited him to sit for a while. Once more, I felt the same warmth in his presence. Our conversation flowed naturally, moving from lighthearted topics to deeper, more personal discussions. He opened up about his career, his aspirations, and the challenges he was facing. As I listened, I felt a sense of pride, like a mother watching her child grow into someone remarkable. But alongside that pride, there was something else, a growing awareness of his attentiveness, the way he looked at me, and the unspoken connection that felt both comforting and unsettling. Over time, our conversations grew more personal, and with each visit, the unspoken tension between us seemed to deepen. It was subtle, an almost imperceptible shift, but it was there. A quiet understanding neither of us voiced, but both felt. I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than friendship, yet deep down, I sensed it was something more, something I hadn't anticipated and didn't know how to navigate. In the weeks that followed, Caleb began visiting more frequently. Each time he stopped by, I felt a mix of anticipation and unease. I cherished his company and looked forward to our chats, appreciating the warmth and connection he brought to my life. But there was also a growing sense of guilt. I worried that I was allowing myself to feel something that wasn't appropriate for our relationship. One evening, as we sat in the living room looking through an old family photo album, I realized just how much I had come to value his presence. We laughed over memories and shared stories, and for a brief moment, I felt a companionship I hadn't experienced in years. But as he leaned in to look at a photo, his arm brushed against mine. My heart raced. It was such a small, fleeting touch, yet it sent a thrill through me that I couldn't ignore. I glanced at him, and our eyes met. In that brief second, there was a connection, quiet, unspoken, but undeniable. It left me both exhilarated and terrified. I knew I needed to put some distance between us, to stop this before it went any further. But each time I resolved to end our meetings, a pang of regret held me back. I couldn't deny the loneliness that had taken root in my life since Neil's passing, the quiet ache that had become my constant companion. Caleb's presence filled that void, bringing a sense of connection and understanding I hadn't realized I was missing. And while I knew my feelings were wrong, I couldn't bring myself to let go of the one connection that made me feel alive again. One evening, as Caleb and I sat in the living room discussing a book we had both recently read, his hand brushed against mine. The contact was fleeting, barely more than a whisper of touch, yet it sent an undeniable jolt through me, a sharp reminder of the feelings I was desperately trying to suppress. I glanced at him, and our eyes met in a way that felt at once tender and charged with unspoken emotion. He quickly averted his gaze, but the silence that followed was heavy, with an understanding we both hesitated to acknowledge. I kept telling myself this was just friendship, but the quiet pull I felt toward him betrayed that notion. There was a longing I couldn't ignore, a yearning that had no rightful place in my life. I often thought about ending these meetings, creating distance between us, but every time the idea crossed my mind, a deep pang of regret held me back. These moments with Caleb had become a source of comfort, a warmth I wasn't ready to let go of, even though I knew I should. Determined to regain control, I threw myself into new activities. I joined a local gardening club, planned more outings with friends, and started taking long, solitary walks around the neighborhood. I hoped these distractions would help me keep my mind from wandering back to those stolen moments with Caleb. Yet, despite my efforts, the connection between us remained unshaken. One Saturday, he visited again, and we found ourselves alone, laughing over a shared story. The moment felt light, almost carefree, but beneath the surface was an undeniable tension that neither of us could ignore. I caught it in the way his eyes lingered a second too long, and in the way his laughter softened, as if he, too, was struggling to maintain the illusion of simplicity. Our unspoken agreement to keep things platonic felt fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment. As the weeks went on, the tension grew. I noticed how his expression sometimes held a hint of hesitation, as if he were questioning the same things I was. I felt it too, a rush of emotions each time our eyes met: excitement, guilt, fear. It was a dangerous mix, and I knew we were treading on thin ice. Despite understanding the risks, I couldn't bring myself to end it. The idea of severing this connection, of losing the warmth and companionship Caleb brought into my life, was unbearable. Yet with every meeting, the boundary we tried so hard to maintain felt thinner. Each shared laugh, every lingering glance, it all added weight to the unspoken bond between us, pulling us closer to a line neither of us was willing to cross, but neither could ignore. At night, I lay awake, my thoughts spinning. How long could we keep this up? How long could we maintain this delicate dance of restraint before something gave way? I knew the answer, even if I didn't want to admit it. This couldn't last. We were teetering on the edge of something that could not be undone, and sooner or later, one of us would have to make the painful decision to step back. The realization sat heavy in my chest, a bittersweet truth that grew harder to ignore with every passing day. After weeks of carefully maintaining this fragile balance, the weight of guilt began to press more heavily on me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was betraying something fundamental: Adam's trust, my own values, and perhaps even Caleb himself, by allowing our connection to deepen in ways it shouldn't. I was indulging in emotions that had no rightful place in our lives, feelings that could only lead to hurt and regret. Every time I thought about ending this bond, a wave of sadness and reluctance washed over me, a deep hesitation to let go of the warmth and companionship Caleb had brought into my days. But I knew this couldn't go on. I began reflecting deeply on my feelings, trying to confront their root cause. I realized it was the loneliness I had felt since Neil's passing, a quiet ache that had settled into my life without my even noticing. Caleb had unknowingly stepped into that void, providing a companionship and understanding I hadn't realized I craved. Even as I acknowledged this, I knew the truth. My feelings were misplaced, and the risk of continuing down this path was too great. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I forced myself to confront these emotions fully. I understood that while I valued Caleb's presence, it wasn't truly him I was longing for. It was the connection, the comfort, the escape from my own solitude. Caleb had simply been the one to offer it. With this clarity, I resolved to create some distance between us. It was a painful decision, one that left me feeling hollow, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't continue carrying this guilt, compromising my own values, and risking our relationship for something that could never be. The next day, I planned to speak with Caleb. I rehearsed how to gently explain that we needed to set boundaries and maintain distance to respect our lives and the friendship we had built. It was a painful conversation to prepare for, but I knew it was the only way to preserve the integrity of what we shared without crossing a line we would both regret. As I prepared for that moment, I felt an odd mixture of sorrow and relief. There was a sense of closure beginning to form, allowing me to view the situation with a clearer, more resolute mind. I understood that this step, though difficult, was necessary to move forward and reclaim the peace I had lost. I knew it would take time to heal, time to rebuild my sense of self, and time to learn how to address the loneliness that had brought me to this point without relying on someone else to fill that void. But amidst the pain, there was also a quiet determination. I believed that I could find my way back to stability and peace, to a life where I could carry these lessons forward without letting them weigh me down. Our final conversation was bittersweet, a quiet yet poignant ending to something that had brought both joy and confusion into my life. When Caleb arrived that evening, I invited him in, feeling the weight of the moment and knowing that this was our goodbye. We sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken emotions and the tension that had been building for weeks. "I understand, Mrs. Caldwell," Caleb said softly. "I never meant to cause any tension or make things difficult." A pang of regret and unexpected sadness struck me. "You haven't done anything wrong, Caleb," I replied. "It's just that I allowed myself to grow too attached. I need to take a step back and focus on finding peace within myself." He nodded gently, his eyes reflecting a mixture of understanding and sadness. For a moment, silence settled between us, a shared acknowledgement that this was the end of our meetings. When Caleb rose to leave, he gave me a warm, comforting hug, a quiet farewell to everything we had shared. As the door closed behind him, I felt an emptiness, a hollow ache that I knew would take time to heal. Yet, amidst the sadness, there was a sense of quiet strength and peace I hadn't felt in weeks. I was confident we had made the right decision, preserving our lives, our values, and our integrity. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I immersed myself in the gardening club, took long walks, and spent more time with my family. I rediscovered my love for reading and explored new hobbies, keeping myself engaged and preventing my thoughts from drifting back to the past. Though Caleb crossed my mind occasionally, the memories of our time together had softened, becoming less painful and more of a life lesson to carry forward. Most importantly, I learned to appreciate my solitude. Loneliness, I realized, is not something to fear, but an opportunity to reconnect with myself, to find peace and fulfillment within my own life. Happiness is not dependent on anyone else, but something I must cultivate from within. As I continue this journey, I know I will never forget that time with Caleb. It taught me profound lessons about loneliness, the complexity of human emotions, and the importance of boundaries in relationships. But more than anything, it showed me my own strength, the ability to face life's challenges, heal my heart's wounds, and embrace the joy that lies ahead. I carry with me hope and determination to continue finding peace within myself, to mend the loneliness that once overwhelmed me, and to embrace the lessons I have learned along the way. Eileen's story reminds us that life often brings unexpected surprises, particularly in relationships. Our emotions can be complicated, but finding the courage to confront them is essential to making the right choices for ourselves. If you found this story meaningful, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Don't miss out on more heartfelt stories and valuable life lessons. Thank you for taking the time to watch, and we look forward to sharing more with you soon.